Hello, Therese.
Hello. Hi.
How are you?
Good, good. Melting away in Spain, but hi, everybody.
Hello. Hi, David. Thanks for reaching out. Good to have you here. Hello, Suzanne. Hi, Christine. Good to see you.
Hi there.
How are you? Just a little more time to give people time enough to join us, and we will get started.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think we're ready. So
All right.
hello, everyone. My name is Susana Ramirez. I'm part of the Catalyst 2030 team, and I am very excited to welcome you all to this session of Catalyzing Climate Actions for a Green Recovery. I'll be helping with the logistical part of this session. So before we start, I just wanted to do some logistical remarks. The first of this is that we'll be recording this session and it will be published in the Catalyst 2030 webpage in the coming days. Please feel free to use the chat box if you have any question during the session. We'll be checking this regularly. And after this session, you will be receiving a follow-up email from our team with a feedback form. So once again, welcome to this session, and I hand over to Frederick.
Thank you, Susanna. Hello, everyone. Again, very pleased to see you all, and I'm hoping that a few more will join during the course of this session. So my name is Frederick Bailey. I am an executive board member and co-CEO at Group SOS, a Paris-based social enterprise. We are not per se climate specialists. As a matter of fact, our core activities lie in the fields of health and education and social welfare, but we are now committed and we are taking action towards, obviously, preventing climate change and promoting ecological transition. I have been voluntold to co-facilitate this session, and I'm humbled and happy because I'm sure we learn a lot actually on climate. We have a great set of speakers who will be introduced later on by my co-host Benjamin Julian, who was kind enough to join me on this session, and he's more of a climate expert, so he will be leading the discussion. Some of you are already Catalyst 2030 members, but maybe some of you are not yet. So before we get started, let me just say a few words about Catalyst 2030 and this campaign that we are now carrying. So we are a global collaborative, and Susanna, thank you, yes, for showing the slides. So we are a global collaborative multi-stakeholder movement. We started just about a year ago in April 2019. And it's a movement led by social entrepreneurs from Ashoka, Echoing Green, Schwab and Skoll Foundations, and others. Our purpose really with this movement is to accelerate progress towards the SDGs. And as you can see, on this slide, and it's actually going from bad to worse now due to COVID, obviously. At the current pace, we will not achieve the SDGs until the end of this century. And obviously with what's happening now with COVID, it looks even glimmer. So we need to take action, and we do need to take action together. We need to change the system, and that's what Catalyst is all about. So we are, like I said, self-organized. We aim to address all 17 SDGs. You see here the main principles of action of this movement. So like I said, collaborative, driven by social entrepreneurs and innovation with the help of large foundations and consulting firms and governments and bilateral organizations. So again, working hard, working fast. We started this movement, like I said, a year ago, but it's now really getting traction. We introduced Catalyst at the World Economic Forum in January, and our goal now is to accelerate with this campaign. Next slide, please, Susanna. You will see, I think, on the next slide, some of the founding members of Catalyst, and of course, for those of you who are interested and not yet part of the movement, please feel free to let us know of your interest, and we'll be happy to have you with us. Now, a few words before we get started with this session about the Catalyzing Change campaign. We are now kicking off with the second round of virtual sessions. There was a first round about a month ago in collaboration with the Skoll Foundation. And we are now kicking off a new series. It will be actually 3 sessions. We started yesterday with a number of sessions. We have a few more today. Again, we're covering all SDGs. So our colleagues and some of you would certainly have attended other sessions on different issues, education and finance and change and all of these. So this is the first series. We will reconvene in a few weeks' time to go deeper into those topics which we will have discussed today, and then there will be a last round until we come up with solutions and proposals which will be addressed and introduced to political leaders and to the United Nations Deputy Secretary General. For the High Political Forum on the SDGs. So really the objectives of this campaign, which was conceptualized by members from all across the network, is to share how we as social innovators and entrepreneurs are responding to COVID. Obviously, our agenda hasn't changed, but we need to take into consideration the effects of COVID. So we are working now on COVID response. How can we actually form collaborative partnerships that can accelerate social change and tackle the COVID issue? How can we co-create policy recommendation based on the extensive expertise of the social innovators? And how can we initiate dialogue with policymakers, funders, and leaders across sectors? So we will share solutions. And again, this session is very open. As you will see, we will have a first round of talks with our speakers, but we will then go into smaller breakout groups. The idea really behind all this is for you and for us together to share ideas, to come up with solutions, and to build on this. So we will just kickstart, but then please join us in the discussion in the smaller groups. So again, at the end of this first session today, we hope to come up with a first draft, a first document, which will then be used for the next session. For all of you, and I will remind you towards the end of this session, who are interested in joining us in working on this document, please let us know in the chat box. Please raise your hand, give us your name and contact details so we can work with you towards preparing the next session early June. I think Susanna would remind us of the possible dates early June. If you have any questions, if you have any ideas that you would like to share with us now, please feel free to do so. Now is the time. Use the chat box as much as you need it. And unless there are any questions, I will hand over to Benjamin.
Thank you, Frederick. So basically the way this is going to work is that I'm first going to give the floor to each of our three eminent speakers who will first tell us about the solution or solutions that they want to put on the table and their policy recommendations to be discussed later in smaller breakout groups. I'm going to introduce the three speakers now and then give them the floor. Our first speaker is Sue Riddlestone from Bioregional. Sue is the CEO and co-founder of Bioregional and also a Skoll, Schwab and Ashoka award-winning social entrepreneurs. Congratulations. And about Bioregional, it has worked for 25 years with partners around the world on real estate developments in cities and on products and company operations. Our second speaker is Jim Fruchterman from Tech Matters. Jim is the founder of Benetech, which is Silicon Valley's largest tech for good nonprofit, and also a Skoll and Schwab awardee. And he's also the founder of Tech Matters, which is part of Benetech, and is the software/data/tech partner with the 1,000 Landscapes for 1 billion people, a coalition that brings better tools, information, and funding to local leaders, building more sustainable economies. This is with the Rainforest Alliance, WWF, UNDP, and other high-profile partners. And last but not least, our third speaker is Anders Wijkman, chairman of the governing board of Climate Kick, and also honorary president of the Club of Rome. I don't have time to mention the full bio of Anders, obviously, because he has worked on sustainability-related issues for several decades at the Red Cross, as policy director of UNDP, as a member of the European Parliament, etc. Thank you very much, all three of you, for being with us today. I'm first giving the floor to Sue from Bioregional. Sue, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Sue Riddlestone. Thanks for the introduction, Benjamin. I'm also co-chair of the Catalyst 2030 Working Group 6, which is about creating partnerships to scale social entrepreneur solutions and advocating for our work at the United Nations at a national level. So COVID-19 is a real emergency, and I think a lot of people around the world have said, we don't want to go back to the old normal. They've appreciated the clean air, the nature, being in our homes, the need for our homes to be good places to live. And people can see we're going to need new jobs. That could be a lot of new jobs coming from a green recovery. So I'm going to focus particularly on sustainable living and our built environment. We've particularly focused on the idea that it's the richest nations, the richest people that are causing the biggest impacts, and this is impacting on people all the way across the world in terms of climate emissions and resource consumption, such that if everybody lived like we do in Europe, the sort of global middle class lifestyle, then we would need 3 planets to support us in terms of climate, carbon emissions and resource consumption. So what we need is one planet living, and that's really what we work on at Bioregional. And you can see here how, on the slide, how the 3 planet impact breaks down. So that gives us a way to approach this. So our homes, how we heat them, how we build them, our choices of transport, food is a big part of our impact, all the consumer goods we buy, and then there's like the whole world that we inhabit once we go outside of our homes and communities. So our response to that over the last 25 years has been to create homes and also products where people can live happy, healthy lives within the natural limits of the planet. And although this is very much something for us who are living in the richer nations, and we need to take urgent action now, most of the construction and the cities are being developed in countries which currently have a lower footprint. So there's a need to make sure that the infrastructure is right in all of these nations. So you can see a picture of Bedsed, which is the eco-village. It's where I'm speaking from right now. It's where I live, where we have our office. And we've tried to address all of those elements here. So it's zero carbon energy use, energy saving, space to put your bicycle, place for nature, and we have a community email, so we share things between us. And so all of these elements are there, and then we then systematize our solution into this 10 principles and this idea of one planet living to make it easy for people to understand and implement sustainability. And people use it in cities for projects, and it's a very participatory process because you need to win people's hearts and minds. So you'd have workshops to create a plan that everybody agrees with. So that's the solution that we have, and that's used all around the world. There you can see a project in China. But in terms of policy recommendations, it's very important that governments introduce better building control at a national level and also at a city level for the standard of the construction, but also for the way we plan things out to make it easy for people not to be sort of building things way out in the middle of nowhere, so people then are forced to use an energy guzzling car. And even if we have electric cars, there's still a big impact there. So in a post-COVID world, there could be a lot of jobs in energy home retrofit and building the energy infrastructure that we all need in perhaps a more decentralized way using energy on buildings. So I guess that's my sort of provocation for the group. And I look forward to hearing from the other speakers and to discussing it with all of you and in the breakout rooms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Jean, the floor is yours.
Great. So our role as a social enterprise is to be the tech company in Silicon Valley that actually can afford to care about 95% of humanity because we're organized as a nonprofit. So our goal is to build the technology that different innovation and community sort of leaders are looking for to actually achieve their goals, achieve the SDGs, achieve Paris. So one of our larger projects is the 1,000 landscapes for 1 billion people. So this is a very ambitious project led by many of the top conservation NGOs. But the difference is they want to focus on local leaders in an ecosystem, in a landscape, in a county, in a province, in a state, generally below the national level. And so we've been interviewing these local leaders about what they need. And they have some stories about data that are pretty much hair-raising. I mean, I talked to a leader from one of the main ecosystems in Kenya, and he said, hey, we have the best studied ecosystem in the Rift Valley, and we don't have any of the data. In other words, we help universities collect data, they go back to the university, we never see the data, we never see the research that they write. So as we are approaching the fact that we're not getting to the SDGs anytime soon, that we have to accelerate our progress toward the SDGs, it's crucial that we actually have better information to enable people to make better decisions, but also know, are we having impact? What's working? And how can we actually most effectively deploy capital to basically get us much closer to the SDGs by 2030? So my policy recommendation is around open data. So, how do we actually get data in the hands of people who are doing local planning, climate action, building sustainable economies? They're trying to measure the impact of different social innovations and ultimately tying into these larger metrics such as our progress against the SDGs and the social progress indicators. So I'm recommending open data as a policy innovation and not just open government data, which has been one of the major policy recommendations out of sort of the open government things. And I'm going to refer to detailed policy recommendations from a group like OpenGov Data and many of the great examples that are already being done in certain national governments. But first of all, clear that we're talking about data. We are not about personal information. We're not talking about stuff that should be confidential. We're talking about climate data, water data, energy data, and of course we have a revolution in geospatial data that we can take advantage of in this area. But there's so much other data. I think that there's going to be a citizen science revolution where local communities just aren't going to wait for national governments to share the data or large corporations to share the data. They're going to go out and start measuring some of the key things about their local community themselves. And again, we need them to share that data. And then, of course, as more and more NGOs and civil society organizations are gathering data, not only about their programs, but also about the human rights experience of different communities, we need access to that data. So, because in many cases, we're not asking people with disabilities, minority communities, women, whether or not their countries are living up to, let's say, some of the international instruments that they've actually agreed to. So that's my policy recommendation, open data, and I'm looking forward to talking to more people on this call about how we can advance this policy recommendation and the other ones that come up in the conversation.
Thank you very much, Jim. I yield the floor now to Anders.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. Let me start by referring to COVID-19 and all that we are experiencing in the middle of this crisis. I think the concept of essential services have been brought to the fore, and I think we have experienced almost everywhere that some of the most essential services which have to do with caring for people, healthcare for people, etc., they have been underfinanced and understaffed. At least that's the case in my country. So I think this whole notion of what is essential and essential services should be really brought to the fore in a public discussion, and forcing governments to really give much more priority to those particular services. Secondly, if we are true to the SDG and 2030 agenda, we need, of course, both bottom-up activities and top-down activities. I have a long background in dealing with these issues, and the more I see of them, the more I realize that the transformation we need is so much different from the incremental steps that we have done in the past. And if we are interested in a transformation of major sectors, we need a systemic approach. We cannot deal with one issue at a time. And we need to look at policy frameworks, because in the present day economy, we value and measure partly the wrong things. We measure well-being or welfare in the form of GDP growth, which says very little about quality. It's only a quantitative measure. And I would like to focus more on the well-being economy. We have a big network that focuses on the well-being economy. We have some individual nations who are in the forefront of that. Iceland is one, New Zealand is another, and Scotland is a third. So I think that's going to be enormously important if we really want to focus also on the social dimension, to stop believing that the growth of production tells us anything about the health and well-being of the people. Secondly, we tend to subsidize the wrong things, so that we have to rethink. We tend to tax the wrong things. In my country, Sweden, 60% of tax revenue is tax on labor. 5% is tax on energy, resource use, and pollution. It's an absurd situation. And that also leads to the fact that linear production is, for most companies, more natural to do than circular production, because sourcing virgin materials from nature is less expensive than making use of secondary materials. And here I think it's a very important issue to really focus on more, because the climate debate has been very much focusing on energy and energy system for good reasons, because fossil fuel emissions are very much the result of energy emissions, but materials are also critical. So moving towards circularity is going to be a very important step in the right direction. And that has to do with the cost structure of the economy. It has to do with extending product life, stop building obsolescence into products. And it has to do with turning products into services, which is a very interesting idea. Because if the responsibility for a product rests with the producer, I can tell you he or she will design the product in a totally different way to make sure he or she can earn revenue as long as possible. So here are some of the issues I think are very important, both in the social dimension and more in the energy and material dimension. Finally, I want to say that even if we have concentrated a lot of energy on energy systems, we still have a huge gap, in particular in Africa. There is very little investment in renewable energy, which means that Africa is running the risk of getting stuck in the carbon economy, because you need access to modern energy carriers for development. And as long as those energy sources are fossil-based resources, the show will go on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anders. I'm mindful of the time, and I'm looking here at the co-organizers. Maybe we should get ready to move into breakout rooms. But first, I want to turn to our audience. I would just want to make sure that everything is clear for you. Do you have any questions about the objectives of the session, the outcomes that are being pursued? In which case, you're more than welcome to signal yourself in the chat or to raise your hand using the little function in Zoom. I'm going to let a few seconds for people to make up their mind whether they have a specific question.
We do have time, Benjamin, if you want to react on some of the comments that were made before we enter the breakout sessions.
Okay, good. Well, I mean, the three proposals and axes of work and reflection that were presented are very interesting, and they cover a very, very large ground. I really do think it's going to be easier to discuss this in small groups, because I could speak 15 minutes at least on each of those options. And I'm looking at the chat. Yeah, Susanna is showing the slide explaining for the breakout rooms. So basically, the question are, what are known systemic approaches or shovel-ready solutions to approaching this issue? And I hope this is going to remain on the screen when we move into the breakout rooms.
It's in the chat room as well. Susanna posted this at the very beginning of the session, so you will find these questions and the outcomes, the expected outcomes of the session at the very beginning of the chat room.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Fred. Well, then I guess it would be good to move into the breakout rooms then, so we have more time to discuss.
Okay, thank you, Benjamin. You will be automatically assigned to a specific breakout room. And so just give it a couple of seconds and you'll be transferred.
Large-scale transformation.
Thank you very much. Do we know if everyone is back already and we can resume? It looks like. So we are now going to hear from each group. And I would like the note taker or moderator for each group to take 3 minutes for each group to summarize the findings of their group. And I don't know whom we should start with. So I'll start with the images on my screen. Anders, do you want to go first?
Well, it was actually Jim in
Oh,
our
sorry.
group who was
Well, I think-
the note taker.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Well, and
But
I think Anders will weigh in along with other members of the group who we missed. But I mean, I think we talked about a wider range of different issues. We spoke a lot about sort of corporates and the misalignment of the financial industry with the real economy and with our real objectives. So yeah, I think this is a big underlying policy issue that we need to address. We talked about CSR as being sometimes window dressing as opposed to fundamental change. You know, but we dove deep on sort of the challenges at the local level. You know, I think that Poonam from India described how there's a giant power disconnect from the people who make decisions, the people who actually live with decisions. And she's using the example of, you know, many people migrating back to their home villages, even though there's no jobs there. So how do we shift more power locally? How do we create better jobs there? And in a context of an economy that, you know, doesn't just make things, but creates more value. So I think that was a large issue. I think, you know, Frederick and the group also kind of identified the balkanization of different communities working on different things. The idea that climate and social welfare are like opposing concepts as opposed to holistic concepts that we should be bringing together and actually, you know, imagining how we're going to get better change in the world. And I think Anders kind of wrapped up with, you know, incremental change is not going to be enough. We need fundamental transformation on how our economies work. We need to change some of these paradigms. And so to really accomplish, you know, things like the Sustainable Development Goals and Paris. So I know, Deepa, did I miss anything that you think we should be putting on the table?
No, I think you did well.
Okay. Any other comments from the rest of our panel? Okay.
And since you took less than 3 minutes, and congratulations for this, in terms of policy recommendation, did you guys get as far as that?
I think they were more implicit in, I mean, we talked about sort of the problem set. And so, you know, so I think it was, you know, how do you reform the financial system so it's less about a casino, you know, environment and more about building the kind of economy that we want. I mean, we have some of Anders' existing policy recommendations as a backdrop for our conversation, so I'm not going to repeat them. But you know, not taxing the wrong thing, not discouraging investment in the right thing, also seem to be sort of the backdrop. But I think the shifting power to local communities, to people who are closer to essentially, you know, the society, the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid, whatever you want to call it, that power shift is really acute because this disconnect between international and national sort of governments and enterprises and the reality on the ground is particularly acute. So what does that look like? Does that mean development of power? Does that mean development of funding and spending authority? I think it means many of those things. But I think we dove less into the specific policy recommendations, but more of the we need policy that's going to encourage these better things.
I think, if I may add, that the present crisis gives us, of course, an opportunity to really try to shift or orient the economy from being 100% globalized into something that is more localized and regionalized. Because I think people start to realize that some of the lack of preparedness in this crisis had to do with the fact that too much was globalized. Supply chains were all over the place, and it was very difficult to come back to the essential services and support simply because of that. So that I think is one important aspect. The other important aspect, which links very well with the local perspective, is of course, if you want to move from a linear production model to a circular production model, it doesn't make sense to send and distribute trivial products around the globe, because you cannot make this shift from linear to circular if you have all this trade going on for even trivial products. So I think the local dimension will be accentuated if you move in that direction. It has to be.
Trade regulation also on the agenda. So we have very big topics: financial regulation, trade regulation. But yeah, obviously these are crucial if we are to go where we need to go. Thank you very much. Sue, do you want to debrief us of your breakout conversation, please?
So Carol's going to report back for us.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Oh, no, yeah, I would have preferred Sue. That's okay. So Sue facilitated just what each of the social entrepreneurs are doing in our group, in our breakout group, asking about what challenges and what policy recommendations. So we had Susan from World Bicycle Relief with a focus on increasing the understanding and awareness of rural mobility, which has been pretty much left out of the conversation to date. So we talked about that. She'd like to connect with others as a convener in that conversation, and also the importance of calculating. I don't know if anyone was on the water and sanitation roundtable where Jack Kim from the toilet group talked about calculating the cost of not giving a toilet to everyone. So similarly, learning from that on rural mobility, what's the cost of not having a bicycle for everyone to get around? And maybe we can connect her and connect together with folks in China that can see the greenhouse gas emissions going through the roof as people came off of bicycles and went into cars. So conversation about, how to raise the awareness and get the data, maybe the economic data, to get more awareness and traction around mobility to the last mile, to the base of the pyramid. Then we had, we had Anandine. She works on deforestation issues. She's got a hybrid, which is really interesting, a nonprofit owned by a for-profit venture. And the main issues there are challenges around government policies, again, getting back to local, so national, local policies, and also getting education for children into the mix, education for the youth. I might be missing a little bit here, but basically sensitizing kids to the issues and bringing them into the conversation.
I'll chip in then that we talked about maybe there's so many forest groups that Amandine said there's a lot of competition between them, but that maybe we could start to convene a conversation for collaboration and have one shared voice. That was what Amandine wanted.
Exactly, yes, well said. And I think that kind of goes through all of the groups. There's competition. We don't want competition, we want collaboration. And then Therese, she has experience with nonprofits. And the idea of maybe bringing in the learnings and expertise of like a Jane Goodall group, where educating the children, the youth, to get involved in these big issues. I mean, she's doing matchmaking between tech and nonprofits that are in need of support, but also tying in, a movement for youth, maybe learning from Sunrise and others, but somehow collaborating around what's happening out there and what social entrepreneurs can learn from that in our collaborations. Sue, so am I missing on the policy recommendations?
Yeah,
I think
Susan.
Go on.
Maybe I could just clarify one point. So World Bicycle Relief is the nonprofit that wholly owns the for-profit social enterprise that addresses rural mobility through bicycles. And one of the other policy recommendations was to think about a UN resolution or amendment to the SDGs as a legitimate part of, bicycles as part of a transportation solution post-COVID in terms of accelerating progress towards the SDGs. So if there's kind of one takeaway, it's that we want to ignite the conversation around rural mobility to support the SDGs and want to continue to collaborate and scale up, work with partnerships, work with partners at all different levels to do that. But this idea about a UN resolution or amendment to the SDGs was something I wanted to make sure was captured in the thing.
Thank you very much. I'm going to also tell you what we've been talking about in our group. So basically, the points that stood out. So there was a lot of agreement on the three work streams or ideas that were discussed in the first round. On data, there was this idea of giving access, compiling and giving access to energy consumption data to industry, so they can propose innovative services and offerings. There is also this idea that technology can help fix the data issue, and one example is open source technology on mobiles, especially for developing countries where there is a problem of colonial mindset of data collection, and obviously people are more on mobiles than laptops. Key question obviously is what value we give to the data. This is going to be also a different issue between developed and this is going to require a different approach between developed and developed countries, and so a different approach in the policy making for open data. On the idea of well-being instead of GDP, or at least on the side, on the same level, the idea is that we need a model for this that can be replicated and that can also give us stories to tell, because we need to inspire people with this, and we need to burst the bubble, because when we talk to each other, we tend to agree, but then when we talk to the outside world, as you all know, it becomes more complicated, unfortunately. The example of Bhutan was this gross happiness index could be a model like this. And I'm turning to the group to see if there's other things that you wanted to raise that I missed. Sorry.
That's a great summary.
Thank you very much.
May I?
Yes, of course.
May I make a comment with regard to the data platforms for mobility? I think it's very important that they should be run by the public sector, because if you let a private company do it, which is happening in many parts of the US today, you run the risk of maximizing profits for some of the private actors, instead of also making sure that the public goods aspect is fully recognized. We have seen a few examples in the US where, for instance, Uber has been more or less taking over the responsibility for mobility in cities, leading to the public transport system being even more marginalized and Uber cars all over the place. It's maybe could be said that it's a convenient system, but it's not a good system. Convenient in the sense of I mean, fast service for citizens, but it's not really what we want to see. So I think it's very important that when you create these kind of platforms, that the public sector is somehow in control, allowing private actors to be part of it, but not controlling it.
Would you say on this issue, it's a very interesting one, Anders, and you're touching upon an interesting point. Would you say that because we know also the limits of the public sector cannot do everything. Would you consider it possible, rather than having the public sector being in control and operating, having, for instance, some sort of a syndicate of not-for-profit actors, social entrepreneurs being in charge, with obviously the public sector overseeing the way it works, rather than saying, okay, the public sector has to run it totally?
Well,
And
I'm not
sure
saying
Jim might have an...
No, I didn't mean to say that the public sector should run it. On the contrary.
Okay.
But
it needs to be overseen over...
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And it should not be handed out to a private actor, rather being an open source, open platform. By the way, I have a professor at the Royal Technology Institute in Stockholm, Anders Gullberg. He has written a paper about this based on a lot of experience in different parts of the world. Very, very good paper that could be sort of a guideline in different parts of the world. So technology in this area is very important. It can help us to really come closer to sustainable mobility, but there are also risks that it will be misused.
And I would just say, I think we are in counterpoint to the privatization of essential data and shifting power to private organizations that control this core data that the world needs. They have the answers to so many of the key social questions we have, but because of their economic interests, they don't share. I don't agree that it has to be the public sector running these things. I think the whole idea behind open data and open source is that everybody has access to this on an unbiased way. And so it doesn't really matter if it's open and free, who actually has the theoretical ownership, if everyone gets the benefit of it. And one of the local leaders I talked to said, the data about my local area is available from the national government for a price I can't pay. What a ridiculous situation that your national government only wants to sell the data that you need to plan your local government. That's undercuts the whole point of what the public good is supposed to be.
We have about 15 minutes until we reach the end of this session. If you agree, I would like for us to take another about 10 minutes to try to wrap up and agree on recommendations. We've had some great ideas and recommendations. Are there a few common areas that keep coming on that we might want to carry forward? We've touched upon regulation and taxation, open data, education, creating maybe a growth happiness index, shifting power from national to local. Now, how can we try and summarize all this? What do we want to focus on to carry forward? Because we also will be, like we said earlier, we'll be compiling those approaches and recommendations, but I think it's important that we be able to sort of agree on a few issues. Sue?
Yeah, I think if we can really think about, because a lot of the things that have been discussed, they're kind of mentioned in the SDGs, or people agree generally that should happen. But if we could be very specific with something that's maybe achievable, like Susan's request that there be a recognition of rural mobility and perhaps an amendment to the SDGs for the value of the bicycle. Because that's very much a social entrepreneur has a solution, and here's a policy change that would help to scale that, accelerate it fast. So personally, I like that approach.
Can I ask you as the moderators? I mean, there are so many organizations all over the world busy proposing policies, solutions, etc. So what would you say is the unique element of this network, and where does it want to make a difference?
So
because we are talking about issues that everybody's talking about.
Yeah. So I think the key difference about Catalyst 2030 is we are a group of social entrepreneurs who have got solutions which could be scaled. So with Susan's solution, it's cheaper for the government to take on because they've already thought about it, making the bicycles durable in a rural situation, cheap and easy to repair. So it's easy for governments to take on. So I guess the uniqueness about us is we're social entrepreneurs who have already got proven solutions which could be scaled, and sometimes a policy needs to be changed and there needs to be a government recognition of the value of it in order to sort of speed it along.
Mhm.
Is that a good answer to your question?
Can I ask a question in relation to that?
Sure,
Just
go ahead.
that, like, we were having a conversation in the systems change session yesterday about how do we, because there are practical solutions that social entrepreneurs are delivering, but actually where do we see the ability to work from a systemic level? And therefore, if it's about rural mobility, then bicycles is one option, but it's not solving the problem of why people in rural locations. It's one aspect of it. I don't know enough about what you're doing, Susan, but how do we link that with actually what is then required if the focus is to be rural? And I think,
yeah, what we were saying
for me, the policy angle for this is actually the interconnectedness and the recognizing that actually Catalyst 2030 brings together people who are working on different areas that are solutions based, but actually how do we get people, someone who's doing stuff with bicycles in rural locations, to then partner and work with somebody who's doing something from a bigger environmental change perspective?
I think there's no one easy answer. What we want to do is to talk to governments about what are their priorities. I myself also spoke about bicycles, or different solutions in the way that we build our built environment. We're building it to make people reliant on cars, and we're undervaluing other ways of traveling, and spreading ourselves out too far so that we need cars. So yes, there's lots of different solutions, but what we're trying to, I think we're not going to have a perfect answer. We're doing it in a social entrepreneur way, which is very, right, we've got to get something done. What is it that social entrepreneurs who've got involved think is needed to really scale their element? And partnerships will form and happen. But I think there needs to be someone who is passionate about it and knowledgeable about it and has already worked on getting a solution for that issue, who's kind of involved and driving it.
I couldn't agree more about the comment. So just to clarify, it's less WBR pushing its Buffalo bicycle. That's not what we're talking about. Clearly, that's part of the solution in some contexts. It's more about igniting a global conversation about mobility and rural mobility in particular to support achievement in an accelerated way of the SDGs, because it cuts across rural mobility, cuts across at least 9 SDGs. And so I actually wanted to attend the systems change discussion, but couldn't end up doing it exactly for the reason that you're talking about. It's a systems level change. It's not just a climate discussion. It's much broader. It's about why is this key issue area not an integral part of partnerships and messaging and behavior change and investments and explicit language related to achievement of the SDGs. So that's why we're recommending convening. So not convening around bicycles, but we're happy to be a voice and a co-convener at the table around rural mobility. Bicycles has a role to play in terms of the solution. But in terms of a UN resolution or amendment to the SDGs, bringing this issue of rural mobility post-COVID kind of front and center directly responds to, I think, the systems change imperative. And I couldn't be more aligned with the comment that you made. I really agree with you that it's a systems level thing and it's less about bicycles than rural mobility. Bicycles are just a part.
But may I just interfere and say that I'm party to several rather big networks working in the city context, C40, ICLEI, Climate Kick, Viable Cities. And I can tell you that we all have this type of agenda relevant all the time. So it's not that it's not happening. So I would submit that the best thing you can then do is to focus on a few of these issues where you feel you have the good examples, and ask these networks to help you scale them out. And then when it comes to scaling up, which has to do with policy, then we have, you know, maybe the UN, maybe national governments, maybe both.
Good advice.
Can I say something?
Sure.
You know, I think that I look at it slightly differently in the sense that I feel that there is this opportunity that we have. I'm talking from my context in India, that there are so many of the organizations working on the same things or similar things, and we've never had the opportunity to actually collaborate and then test out certain hypotheses. So I'll give you a tangible example. I've seen in our work that when you get people to own something and get them to build a sense of pride, and you make the solution very simple for replication and copying left, then there is a spread which is beyond your control, and you achieve the outcome that you want to, which is for everybody. So if you follow that and you say, all right, there are other organizations who are already doing work and reaching people perhaps you personally cannot or your project cannot, how can you work with them to get the same ideas to reach a broader audience, and also experiment and see all the things that were holding you back? Like, I feel distributed power, ownership of local resources, or ownership of participation in local government decision or panchayat decisions, or our, you know, local ward decisions in cities. If you want to make change happen through that, Catalyst 2030 seems to be a great place, because you can actually use the fact that you're part of this larger group and say, look, let's all partner together to achieve that change that we want, which as an individual entity, you may not be able to.
I would build on that. I would observe that what's unique to social entrepreneurs is that they work in partnership with the community they want. They don't do things to the community, they do them with the community. And I think this context of shifting power locally is something that does tie to the unique characteristics of our network, which tend to be focused much more at this sort of local and regional action and less at national, international action. And of course, our particular recommendation around open data is just part of that, because we were inspired by the fact that local leaders don't have the information that they need, or that, you know, if we want to know who is the most effective or which interventions are the most effective, we don't have that data because it's balkanized among 500 NGOs and government agencies. So I think this power shift to the local community and local level has legs in terms of our thing, and the bicycle and rural mobility thing is just one example of that kind of shift to a local kind of policy environment that enables this mass change, but built up from the ground, from the grassroots and the grass tops.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone. We are reaching towards the end of this session. So again, thank you everyone for your participation. We will be compiling all the approaches and recommendations into a report. We will reconvene, like I said, I think, Susanna, if you can help me out here, is it between the 1st and 2nd of June, or is it a bit later?
It's a little bit later. We actually have a poll, so
yeah.
I'll just put it up in this moment.
Okay, so we have a poll, so we'll ask each of you to tell us which date would work best for you to reconvene. Again, the goal is to compile all of these into a 1 or 2 pager. If you have any, if you want to add any policy recommendations at a later stage, please feel free to do so by Friday, June the 5th. If you would like to volunteer for the drafting of this report, please let us know now and send us your name and email address. I think we will use what's just been discussed as a base for our policy recommendations around, again, shifting power locally, locally, and providing data, recognizing the importance of rural mobility. We have taken note of everything else, so we'll work on this. So again, please let us know in the chat box, or there's not many of us, you feel free to just raise your hand if you wanna participate at a later stage. I see that Sue will obviously be part of it, and thank you for that. Anyone else, feel free, please spread the word. Tell your friends, colleagues, contacts about Catalyst 2030. We are a collaborative, self-organized movement. And again, I think we've achieved a lot by being self-organized with no central power in a very short span of time, and especially in this context of COVID. Anyone else? I see Sue. Anyone else wants to volunteer? Suzanne? Great. Will you please send it? Well, yeah, great.
I can edit. I can't write a draft, but I'm happy to edit.
Okay. Fantastic. David, thank you. All right. I think we've just lost Anders. Anyone else want to add anything before we wrap up? Susanna, have I forgotten anything? You're the host here. Are we good? Great.
I'm covered, yes.
Thank you everyone for your participation. Thank you, Therese and Carol, for your support. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Great.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, that was great.
Bye.